Hello, here is something fun. I just got a chance to speak with legendary board game designer Martin Wallace. Martin is responsible for some absolute classic games, some of the best I've ever played, like Brass, which is just incredible, as well as games that I still never had a chance to play but are absolutely at the top of my bucket list, like Study in Emerald. I talk with Martin about his game design philosophy and how he likes to put story at the heart of his gameplay, how he's come to make so many different games from so many different themes, play styles, and mechanics, as well as what he is working on at the moment, which includes a fighting fantasy adventures game. Martin actually started his career in gaming working in a Games Workshop store in Manchester, and now he's working with Games Workshop founders Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone to create Fighting Fantasy Adventures, an adaptation of 4 different Fighting Fantasy game books into 5 scenarios based on this new card-based role-playing game system. It is a cooperative game. We talk about it towards the end of this interview, but before that, we talk about all kinds of interesting stuff, how he's come to make so many of these fantastic games, and how he approaches his game design process. This is not a sponsored video. I'm just a big fan of Martin's work and a big fan of fighting fantasy. Getting a chance to talk with someone who has designed so many amazing games that have graced my gaming table for many, many years, it was just too good an opportunity to miss. Martin is actually based in Australia now, and I'm based in the UK, which means that we've had a few technical issues during the conversation, just a bit of lag and a little bit of robotic voice. Unfortunately, I've not been able to correct for that, so you may have to struggle through just a couple of moments throughout the interview where it does get a little bit robotic. I'm really sorry about that. There's just nothing I've been able to do. So hopefully you can make it through and you'll still get to hear all of the amazing answers and discussion that Martin and I have. I am Jordan. This is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm having a conversation with legendary games designer Martin Wallace. Martin, how did you first get started in the world of board game design? What's your journey been through board games?
Um, Enjoyed playing games when I was a kid. Very much into um, military history. So used to like making airfix kits.
Oh,
Making a Spitfire and stuff. And you how as a kid you make up little rules. So you got your little toy soldiers. So you kind of that H.G. Wells kind of thing of playing with little toy figures. Um, at secondary school, one of my teachers ran a games club. Very unusual for the school I went to because most of the people, if you were going to do a school reunion at my old school, it would probably be in a local prison. It was a pretty rough school, but yeah, um, but yeah, that kind of got me into more complex games. So I think I bought my first SPI game when I was 14. 13 or 14, yeah, it was Star Force. It's horrendously complicated. But um and yeah, then when I got to sixth form, got into Dungeons and Dragons. Because you could do that then, when you're young and got loads of time to do these things.
mm.
And but no inclination to design games at that point. That came later. I just enjoyed playing them. Um
Were you a DM or a PC in your
No,
days?
I do the odd DM. I mean, we sort of used to take turns, but there was one guy in our group who had the right pseudo sadistic propensities to be a good DM. So yeah, so usually he was a DM. I do the odd bit, but I think it takes a particular kind of personality to be a good games master. Um, so yeah, and then one of my first, my first Saturday job was working Games Workshop when I first opened a shop up in Manchester. So that exposed me to a lot more games. And then got a full time job with them soon after that.
I don't think I realised that you grew up around Manchester. I'm Manchester based, so yeah, I've spent a lot of time in the old Games Workshop that was in Manchester, which was in the Arndale when I was younger. I think that was not
Yes.
was that the first one, or was that did it move into the Arndale?
The first one was St. John's Square. So, I don't know. There was a tiny shop. The Arndale one was the second one. The first one, um, yeah, it was St. John's Square. And I'm trying to think of the best way of describing where that is. But, down towards Waterstones,
Right,
St. Anne's Square right there.
sure.
And then it moved to the Arndale. And as you probably aware, that was back in the day when Games Workshop did everything. They had D&D, they had Avalon Hill, they had Monopoly, they were. This is pre-Warhammer
Hmm.
time, so it was an amazing collection of games, and for me, it was a great education because you just spend your time, because obviously you got periods of downtime and you could just spend your time reading these rules, learning about these different games. Um, and I was flat sharing with the manager at the time, so we spent a lot of time in the evening playing this game. So that it was, yeah, a big part of my education into board gaming and just playing lots of different games. But this was before Euro games, so it's mostly American style games. But yeah, I wasn't born in Manchester. I moved there. My parents moved up there in 1969 when I was 7 years old. So even though I don't have a Mancunian accent and I wasn't born there, I spent most of my formative years
Hmm.
in Manchester. Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how many connections Manchester seems to have with the sort of wider Games Workshop history. Obviously, with Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson both
Mm,
coming from the area, and there's a lot of other
mm.
people seem to have gone through Manchester at different points in time who have gone on to be
Yes.
quite impactful in game history. It seems
Mm.
like to me, I don't know if that's a bias on my part, but it's interesting to me.
Uh, yeah. Maybe I don't know. I never really thought about it. I think Manchester's still going to be more famous for cotton.
Sure. Yeah.
That, that, that's yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I know we'll definitely come back to that as we talk.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. So, when you worked at Games Workshop, then that was purely in the retail space. Did you ever go into the design
I
side of
was a minion.
stuff? Right.
I was like 20 years old. I was on like £50 a week, something stupid like that. And I was just a desk. I was just a sales assistant. That was to the low. Um, and yeah, nothing more than that. Nothing more than that. So, and I think I was there for just over a year.
Right.
Um, and then I moved on to other things. But yeah, just kind of amusing thinking, back then I worked for Ian and Steve, and now I'm working with Ian and Steve. It's weird, weird. Anyway,
That's
that's
fantastic.
for later. Mm.
Sure. So you then went into, did you have sort of another career before you went into game design, or was it from the retail space into sort of starting your own
I
games and putting stuff together?
I bumbled around. I mean, after sixth form, I started a computer course, dropped out because I just didn't cope with it, or just didn't didn't gel with me. I bummed around doing Games Workshop, did some other jobs, and then eventually I decided I wanted to go back into education and get a degree. So I went back and did a humanities at Manchester Polytechnic.
Mhm.
Um, so history and economic and social history. And then that led me into teaching because what do you do with a history degree? It's like, I wish they told me that before I started. It's like, what the hell do you do with a history degree? And at that time, the only thing you can do with it is go and teach. Although the other thing you can do with a history degree is it helps you design games. But there was no game design career path back then. But subsequently, I found the ability to read really dull books very useful when it comes to designing certain games. So, but no, I went into teaching. And yeah, at that point, yeah, I kind of dropped out of games for a while. That's when and then yes, I think it was when I was 30 when my first child came along. I was in a relationship, and then for some reason, I never know why, I thought, oh, I think I'll have a go at designing games. I have no clue why. I mistakenly thought there was money in it. There you go.
Right.
A lot of people do think there's money in designing games, and it's like surprising how quickly the industry disabuses you of that notion.
It does seem like a tough industry to work in, and there's a lot of competition besides everything
Oh,
else. But yeah, it must be quite tough.
the thing is, everybody sees the successes. So they see the people like Richard Garfield or Alan Moon, and I suppose some people will look at me and say, "Oh, yeah, you're an incredibly successful designer." It's like, yeah, I am successful, and in reality, I have a nice house. I have 1.5 acres of land. I have a nice 4-bedroom house. But I suppose it's a little bit like being an actor or an author. You can't stop working because if you do, the money dries up.
Right.
So you have to keep going, especially if you do have a higher mortgage. There's bigger bills to pay. So it sounds like I'm bleating, really, like the champagne problems. But it is difficult to make a career in board game design, which is why there's so few full-time board game designers.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know because I've never really looked into it properly, but I'm guessing there's a lot of board game designers who are potentially quite well known who still have the day job or work part-time or something like that because it's difficult to make a living in this business.
Sure. I'd imagine it's very tough outside of the sort of bigger, the kind of corporate monoliths that are out there who are producing
Mm.
games, right? And I have no idea how they operate and how they bring in people to design games and whether those are full-time roles or things like that. But on the independent side, it must be
Mm.
very difficult to create the space, even just on shelves for your games. But then to actually get everything created and printed and into stores must be quite a tough journey.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, um, I mean, I'm lucky in that I've been doing it for a long time. So um, it's like I have the experience of knowing people. So last week I was at Origins and the American show because I was being inducted into the Hall of Fame.
Mm.
And I bumped into a guy that you probably never heard of. This guy, a gentleman called Will Niebling, who used to be involved in Mayfair, and I'd known for years. I met him the first year. I went to Essen in 1994, and I bumped into, oh well, Martin. We got talking, went out, had a beer, and I was just talking because I've gone back into publishing. I was saying, oh, tell me about the distribution scene in America at the moment. Who do you know? And he said, oh, my mate Danny, who works for PSI, he'll be here tomorrow. Do you want to meet him? So that'd be great. And then I met Danny, lovely guy. And I think if I'd been a nobody, I wouldn't have been able to do that
Mm.
because he wouldn't have known me. And so there are advantages to knowing people. It's just networking. It
Sure.
really is networking. Whereas if you are new to this industry, you don't know who to talk to. You don't know who who's going to help you, and it's tough. I really would not want to be starting my career now because there's so much more competition.
Sure, yeah.
When we went to Essen back in 1994, we could sell stuff there because there was no competition because nobody was doing or very few people were doing games like I was doing. There just weren't that many people designing game, kind of heavier Euro games. There was nothing like that. And so there was no competition. And now it's like, oh, competition is immense, scary, frightening, just, yeah, crazy.
Well, it's interesting how often pretty much every industry at some level seems to come down to that
Mm,
networking aspect and who
mm,
you know and what the name is and the status and all that sort of
yep.
stuff that opens doors. But I think on the
Mm,
competition point, it's a very good one, just because it even seems like fewer games can retain that high level of success because there's so much new stuff coming in and churning over, and you don't tend to
yeah.
see even on a board game geek when you look at the charts. There's a couple of
Mm,
stalwarts who are always there, including Brass, of course. But
mm,
then actually getting onto that chart and staying there is very, very
mm.
tough because there's so much new stuff
Yeah,
all the time.
yeah. It is. I mean, it's great from consumers.
Mm.
Like, you've never had so much choice. I mean, back when I was a 16, 17-year-old, Avalon Hill might do a couple of games a year, if that. And so when a new game came out, you bought it because there was nothing else. Whereas now you are flooded with options. I mean, but at the same time, and I've said in other interviews that the upside at the moment is though that games like Brass can sell in significant numbers, whereas back in the day, these more complex games that they just had no sales potential. So we live in interesting times, where big complex games can sell in significant numbers. Um, so yeah, there's pluses and minuses. And overall, for me, I would probably say there are more pluses now than there were in the past, and that yes, there is more competition, but there are still ways to get to the market. That with Kickstarter and GameFound and stuff like that, there are still ways of getting to people, and because there are so many more people around interested in games, the market is a lot way bigger than it used to be. So
Mm.
swings and roundabouts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, thinking then about Brass, actually, whilst we're on the topic, I mean, my friend and I used to play it pretty much every single week for at least a year.
Mm,
And one of the things
yeah.
that was incredible about it, we were pretty evenly matched from a sort of
Mm,
gameplay perspective. And
mm,
because it is so finely balanced and well put together and just well
mm,
designed, it really did mean that
mm,
anybody could win. And I wouldn't be surprised that if we'd kept
mm,
track of our scores, it would have been pretty much 50-50 because it so much
yeah.
came down to the gameplay, your decisions in the moment.
Mm.
I mean, do you think that that has contributed to why Brass has been such a success and is remembered so well and it's such an important game?
Not a clue. No idea. Um, you know, when I remember finishing when I um, finished designing it, I thought, yeah, it's all right. It's okay. I honestly did not think there was anything special about that game.
Really? Because it's
Nope.
so it just is it is a perfect, and this is something I'd love to
Mm,
almost, well, understand, is it so perfectly captures, I think, the
mm,
theme that you have built it around. It
mm,
feels like you are this Victorian magnate who is building his
mm,
coal mines and is shipping his cotton and laying down all the railroads, because the mechanics really play into the different
mm,
things you're trying to achieve. It to me feels like this kind of perfect relationship between theme and gameplay. So, I mean,
mm.
from a design perspective, do you come up with a load of mechanisms and then go, right, how can I theme this up? Or do you come up with a theme and then start coming up with specific rules that fit it?
I 99% of the time I start with a theme. So brass, two inspirations. One of my playtesters at the time said, "Oh, doing a lot of these kind of war gamey Euros, things like, oh God, what would it be like Pericles, Struggle of Empires, and stuff like that." And he said, "Why don't you do something more economic, like Age of Steam?"
Hmm.
I thought, okay, yeah, okay, let's try something that's more economically based. And so the second thing was when I was studying doing my degree, there was a historian I came across called Marc Bloch, Bloch, French historian. Spent most of the Second World War in a prisoner of war camp where he did, despite the fact they had lack of resource materials, was still able to write some really interesting medieval history stuff.
Hmm.
But his key insight says historians should write about the place they know. You should write about where you live, because that's what you know best. And I thought, okay, so I live in Manchester, then what's the biggest thing that ever happened in Manchester? Well, that would be the Industrial Revolution. So therefore, that will be the theme of my game. So, and that is exactly how it came about. It's purely this aim to do a game about the place that I lived, and therefore the Industrial Revolution is the best known thing that's, well, the most prominent thing that's ever happened in the history of Manchester.
Hmm.
So yeah, started with the theme, and it kind of helped. It's like, yeah, I already knew quite a lot of the stuff. So yeah, I did some research, but a lot of it was stuff that I already knew. And I suppose there's this initial idea. I don't have any clear memory of how it came about, but just this, when you, it's like when you're studying geography, you talk about communication networks, so places that create stuff that needs to move to somewhere else and whatnot. And I thought that should be the dynamic, that it should be a case of an interplay between industries. And yeah, so I think the initial idea came through very quickly, and then it was just a lot of playtesting because there was a lot of inputs. It was balancing the economy was the hard bit, making sure there was no runaway feedback. Yeah, that's definitely most not you wouldn't. I don't see how you could come up with a bunch of those mechanics and then go looking for a theme. I don't see how, especially with the Burke and Ed rule. Like, yeah, we're gonna have a really obtuse rule about this place there.
But yeah, I mean, you definitely managed to evoke that theme through those rules. I think,
Mm.
very, very well done. I mean, the other, because your actual breadth of games that you've designed over the years, it is a real eclectic mix of different themes and concepts. Some of those you can, I'm assuming, do come directly from that history degree and that sort of experience there. A few acres of snow and things like that really
Yeah.
lean into the historical stuff. But then there's
Mm.
also a lot of wild concepts and sort of fantasy themes and sci-fi and whatever else in there. So
Mm.
how do you sort of start tackling your next project? Do you just come up with an idea in the shower and go, right, that's going to be what I base my next game on? Or are you looking for more specific stuff?
Um, there's always several elements of inspiration. Okay. So sometimes it'll be something I'm reading in a book that will trigger an idea, which I'll come back to in a minute. Sometimes, more recently, um, it's also what you can do physically with a game. It's like Bloodstones, which was on Game Found last year. That wasn't inspired by the desire to do a particular theme. It wasn't inspired by the idea of doing a generic fantasy war game. That was inspired by looking at people trying to work out how to play a fantasy flight game, and I was just appalled at the amount of components in the box. And this is going back a while. This is back when I lived in Manchester.
Mm.
So there's so many bits, it's counters and different card decks and dials and this and that. And just from a distance, I thought, that's just overwhelming. Can we not have something simpler? So I thought, so there, I'm thinking, how can we have a game with very simple components, which has still got depth to play? So I came up with this idea of using kind of like domino tiles, and so that's Bloodstones. Last year, I wanted to examine whether it's actually possible to publish a game in Australia, actually physically produce it in Australia. So I thought, okay, so it's going to have to be a card game because that's the easiest thing to do. So I thought, what would be a good thing for a card game? And I thought, well, what about having something based on Australian rules football, but with animals? So it's animal rules football. So again, zero research on this one. But you just have like a team of kangaroos versus cockatoos or versus wombats. So that was inspired. I mean, it turned out then after I got a quote from the local princes, like, yeah, no, we ain't using this in Australia because it's still way too expensive. But the game's done now, so we'll just go and get it printed in China. So those are examples of games where there's like zero reading involved. Where it's like at the moment, I've been working on a series of civilization games. Kind of started when COVID hit. I've always been promising myself I want to do a really good civilization game. So when COVID hit, and I was kind of embarrassed, I was like, okay, let's get down and do this. So I did what I think is a really good civilization game, but it only goes from 3000 BC to 300 BC or BCE. Sorry, let's be correct. BCE, 3000 BCE to 300 BCE. And I thought, well, maybe we'll follow this up. And then kind of had a design left over from that I had done originally for the Plastic Soldier Company, which is based on the Rome Total War. I thought, well, that can be the bit in the middle. And so now at the moment, at some point soon, I'm going to start doing the third one, which will be the medieval period. Now that is, I've got a great big stack of books that I'm going to have to go through. I mean, some of them I've been through, but that's going to require a lot of reading because I want to get it right. And this is something interesting. I don't know. I test a lot of games from other aspiring game designers, and I am not sure that other game designers actually read books. I mean, obviously for entertainment maybe, but I don't think they actually do any research. Certainly, when I see, maybe one or two of them, but and it's something when I'm doing a talk on game design, I say, you have to know the story you want to tell, and what is the story you want to tell within the game, and because sometimes players, they might think they want to do a game on a certain theme, but if they don't understand the theme, maybe they're telling the wrong story, or maybe they're not clear about how that story should be told. And I always think you need to go and read, you need to research the thing so you know exactly the story you want to tell. As an example, I'm going on a bit here, and I probably shouldn't mention it, but there's a game I'm working on for a company. They asked me to do a game on Baghdad, medieval Baghdad, not present day Baghdad, because no. And so I go away and do the reading. And the problem with Baghdad is there's nothing left of it. I mean, you can't, it's all leveled, and it's just the nature of the place that it's all built out of mud brick anyway. So I thought, the research thing, if you're going to story about Baghdad, it should be about building the buildings. But then it's like, after doing the reading, it's like, no. Actually, the story about Baghdad is succession crisis. And there was always a succession crisis because he didn't have any clear, strong rules about succession. There would always be at least two, if not more, people who are ready to occupy the throne when the caliph died. So you have a series of civil wars, and what would happen is that families, the main families, would know this civil war is coming along, and they have to decide which horse to back beforehand. Which of the potential successors are they going to cozy up to? I'm thinking that's the story, not the buildings, not the architecture, but the fact that there's a civil war going on here. So that's what the game is based around. It's basically a game where you're not quite sure which side people are on, who's on your side, who's on the enemy side, because that's the nature of politics. You're never sure about where people's real loyalties lie. And that purely came about from the reading.
I mean, that's fascinating to hear. And even just that sort of philosophy of story first when it comes to the design of games. And then actually, you're trying to bring to the fore a particular narrative through the mechanics and through the gameplay and all that sort of stuff. it's interesting to think in that way, because I imagine not everybody does approach games thinking that it's a storytelling exercise. It's certainly not from a design,
Mm,
also from a play perspective. I suspect there's going to be people who don't imagine it in that way. Even if they experience it in that way, they're not
mm.
necessarily thinking about the story. So hearing that that's almost where you're beginning your journey with a game and designing a game is quite interesting.
Yeah, and sometimes I have to remind myself of this. I mean, a few years ago when I was back in New Zealand, I started with my friend Amanda Milner of Shellmill that we did the Australia game together. And she wanted to do a game about the music industry. She really loves her music. She's really into Bob Dylan and stuff like that. Oh, let's do a game about rock music. And I'm like, no, this is death. Rock music games, there's never been a good music game. And so I kind of killed that idea. Then I thought, well, what about a fantasy music game? So a fantasy rock and roll game. So that just have some fun with it. So I knocked something together, and I used all the same lazy tropes that you find, you know, um, you know. So the drummer was more likely to get killed than anybody else, and you had silly names for songs and so on. And it was all right, but it wasn't great. And thought, yeah, it was kind of too complex for the family market, but it wasn't deep enough for the gamer market. So it fell between two stools. So I thought, yeah, let's just leave that one to one side. But then I came back to it recently because I thought I do want to do, we had a really good time. I had a really good time working with Mandy on the Australia game. I thought, really good to do something else. Maybe we'll resurrect the Monster Rock game. I thought, maybe I should do the reading. And that's what I did. I thought, I will just go read. And I just read about the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and Led Zeppelin and Crosby, all the 60s bands. And that made me aware that actually there is a story. Because what happens, you kind of assume if you were just going to do a game about a rock band, it should just be about getting a group together and then how many gigs can you play and how many records you can sell. That should be the measure of your success. And that's what a lot of music games do. But during the reading, the thing that struck me was in the 60s, this was a period of revolution where various governments around the world were seriously scared that things were going to go sideways. And musicians, bands then were seen as, the potential radical leaders of this revolutionary movement. John Lennon funded what would be called terrorist organizations. Jimi Hendrix was number one on the FBI list of people to lock up come the revolution. Thought, hey, you're in a fantasy world. Let's have the revolution. So now the game is, when you're playing a gig, it's not about selling records. I mean, records is part of it. But now it's playing a gig so you can get the followers you need to go and storm the walls of City Hall and take down the man. And it just adds an extra dimension to the game. So now you have a different story going on. And that all came about because of the reading. That was just seeing what story you wanted to tell.
Yeah, so I mean it's super interesting that even on the face of it, a music game, monsters music game even, can then become a game that's about history and something more, the politics, the sort of the story of all of that wrapped up in what might on the face of it sound like a simple game.
And there's little bits that are, it's like there's a lot of random events. It's like one of the random characters is this nasty police officer called Nobby Trout that you come across. And there was a real police officer called Norman Trout who made it his obsession in life to bang up the Rolling Stones. That was his number one aim. I want to lock up the Rolling Stones, to the degree that he would raid George Harrison's house, and they're all doing drugs. Everybody's doing drugs. And he would only arrest the Rolling Stones. Everybody else is fine. It's okay, George. Carry on smoking the bong. That's cool. I'm just taking Mick. Okay. And so yeah, it's like Norman Trout, Nobby Trout. I mean, who has a name like Norman Trout? I mean, it's ridiculous. Ridiculous name. So yeah, so there are references to real people. It's also like in this fantasy world, it's like, when you play D&D, it's like, oh, well, I'll have a potion of strength, or I'll drink this potion of invisibility and stuff like that. I'm thinking, so then would be drugs then, wouldn't they? Really, what we're talking about is drugs. We're not talking about potions. So now we can have drugs because it's a fantasy world, and we can have drugs in a legal sense because they're just potions. So that's okay. So yeah, it's not a deep game. So if anybody's looking for browse to, it's like, yeah, the game is designed, plays in an hour. I wanted to keep the rules relatively simple because I kind of think it's meant to be fun. So therefore, we don't want deep, complex rules. We just want relatively light, straightforward rules, just so that people can have fun. And again, there's sometimes something I see, in aspiring game designers where they'll have what to me seems like a really fun theme, and then they load it down into this really complex monstrosity, and I get kind of thinking, no, if the theme you've got is meant to be light and fun, then keep the mechanics light and fun. If your theme is deep and complex, then fine, have a deep and complex game. But yeah, be careful that the mechanics match the theme. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, I mean, it's fascinating stuff. That, yeah,
Mm.
very interesting. I mean, thinking then about fantasy stories. Obviously, you're currently running a Kickstarter for Fighting Fantasy Adventures. So,
Yep.
how did you come to be working on a game and designing a brand new game around that classic series of game books, the Fighting Fantasy books?
Random chance.
Right.
All random. It's all super, super random. 2 random meetings. Back in 2017, I self-invited myself to a meeting with a guy who's running a local video games company, who wanted to test his idea for a role-playing game because he wanted to do a nice, simple role-playing game that was basically a deck of cards. And what he put together was basically a tell your own story game where you had cards and got keywords, and you have to kind of improvise as a group and come up with an adventure. And I thought, yeah, I don't like that kind of game, but I like the idea of a simple role-playing game with just a deck of cards. So I'm thinking, how could you do that? How could you create a role-playing experience just with cards? I'm thinking, well, the thing it seemed to me is it's got to be a set deck. You can only play it once because the problem with the original idea was there were no surprises because you just group storytelling. Whereas in an adventure game, you want surprises. You don't know what lies behind the door. You don't know what's around the corner. You don't know when the big bad is going to appear. You want surprises. That's the fun of playing a role-playing game. So so it's going to be a deck of cards, but you can only play once. And the first version I came up with, you had to have a games master. Just because I didn't want dice or anything else. I just wanted cards. So even had a combat system that played off the cards. And that was okay. That was nice. And then in 2018, I was over at the UK Games Expo, and I bumped into Ian Livingstone. Hi, Martin. And we got chatting, and Ian was saying, oh, I'm looking for somebody to do a game based on the Fighting Fantasy books. Would you be interested? Like, yeah, I'd be interested. And then a little while later, thinking, because I did start on doing kind of like a board game adaptation of the Fighting Fantasy books, but then it occurred to me, like, these would be really good content for this fantasy card game I've got. And now I can also adapt it so that it can be played solo and cooperatively. So I get rid of the need for the games master because now I'm adding dice, and it kind of diluted it a bit because it destroyed the purity of the game because it's no longer cards. Now it's the majority of cards, but now, yes, you do have dice and you have counters and a few other bits, but it's still mostly the same. So yeah, 2 random meetings. That was it. A lot of my life is random. It's just go in different directions, and also yeah, not the kind of thing I'm known for, but I kind of think I do think there is a gap in the market there. There are a lot of people role playing is coming back in a big way.
Mhm.
Um, but things like D&D are way more complicated now than when I first started, and it's a lot of work to get involved in a D&D campaign. So I'm hoping, I'm not sure, but I'm hoping there is a market there for people who want to experience role playing, but at a lower level. So this is like kind of an introductory role playing system.
Sure, to
But we
kind of
will
get
see.
yeah, and it
Yeah.
because it is solo and group play, and you don't
Mm,
need a GM. It is
mm.
almost like a plug and play game, right? So you can get it out and in a sort of less formal environment potentially.
Yeah.
You don't need to create you don't need your D&D campaign session
Well,
and get it all set up and have all of the prep
mm,
work that goes into that
mm.
because it's actually being powered by the deck of cards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I'm hoping will happen, because I played this a lot. Yeah, I'd be running this game for different groups, and the thing is, I'd be playing this game with people who'd never played board games and never done role playing. But if you run the game for them, because it's like the choices they've been presented with initially are, yeah, which way do you want to go first? They're kind of real world problems. They're not having to internalize a set of rules. They're not having to understand anything. You can present them with stuff at the point they need to know it. So it's like, yeah, when you get to combat, fine, roll these dice, add your skill. I'm going to roll these dice, add the skill, the difference is the damage. That's it. That's the combat. Added to that. Ah, yeah, that was bad, wasn't it? Do you want to use a luck to reroll? Yeah, okay, fine. Use a luck to reroll. So what I'm hoping happens is that people realize this is a game that they can play with people who are not into role playing or board games as such, but they can have fun because they're part of a story.
Mhm.
Because the rules aren't getting in the way of the story. It's not a case of, oh, I don't know what happens in this case, so I better go and consult the rule book or something like that. The situations are in a relative, say the base rules are so simple. It's like you can focus on the story. Like, do you move the rock? Which box do you open? Do you trust the mad looking guy or do you stab him? Just, yeah, kind of
They're
old
all
standard.
classic fighting fantasy questions, those as well.
Yes. Yeah. So, so yeah, I mean, we're not doing great on Kickstarter at the moment, but we're dealing with that. We have a cunning plan. But I kind of think this game is more about retail. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm focusing on making sure the game gets to retail, because basically the only way it really works is if the game is as cheap as chips. It's got to be at the lowest possible price point, so people go, yeah, even though I can play this game once, it's not a lot of money. 5 adventures in there for not a lot of money. Fine, I'll go for that. So which is why Kickstarter is not the best platform for it, really. If it had a gazillion miniatures in it, then fine, but it doesn't. It is designed to be cheap.
Yeah.
But I do know, but because of contacts I have, so I do have a way of getting into retail. So I'm not worried about that because I know people at Asmodee, I know people at PSI, I know, anybody I don't know, they know me. So I'm in the fortunate position that as long as I come up with a good looking product, which we are going to do, it will get into retail. And I think when it gets into retail and people start playing it and word starts spreading, people realize, yes, this is a good product.
Yeah. Yeah, because the Kickstarter model is an interesting one now. Because, like you say, it
Mm.
feels to me as an outsider that the direction of travel for most Kickstarter games really has gone into that very big and huge boxes full of miniatures, lots
Yep.
of expansions, all of that sort of stuff, all bundled
Mm.
in. Some of those are great, and it's absolutely it can be an amazing way to get some amazing games. But
Mm.
the nature of Kickstarter as a tool seems to have changed as a result of that. So, what was your thinking in using the Kickstarter as opposed to just going straight to a sort of a bigger partner to publish it, or just publishing it direct yourselves? Is that
Um, well, it still needed to raise some money because there's a lot of artwork to be done.
Mhm.
There is a lot of artwork. So primarily it is to get the money together to get the artwork done. Uh, as far as licensing it to another company is difficult because I'm already paying uh, quite a significant royalty for the rights. And the problem is, as soon
Okay.
as you start paying out royalties, you can only afford to pay out so much. Um, but I'm in negotiations with a company over here to do a a sort of pseudo partnership where they're going to help with distribution. But I can't say any more about that because those negotiations are still underway.
Sure.
But but yeah, I think it's mostly just it's cash flow because the thing is, normally when I do a game, it's just like I design a game, I show it to different companies, and they either take it or they don't. But with this game, I need staff. I need a full-time art director.
Hmm.
So that means I need cash flow because if you're paying somebody's wages, you need to pay them every month. It's not like normally where it's like, yeah, I need some work done. Work for hire where you just pay for work when it needs to be done. And I need a full-time art director, and I've got a part-time business manager, Cassie, and they need paying on a regular basis. Um, so therefore, you need to keep the money coming in. So to be honest, Kickstarter was never really so much about raising what was needed. It's more about cash flow
Right.
um, until we can get to the point where we can do both the Kickstarter version and the retail version. But the real money from that game will eventually return from the retail version. But yeah, moving forwards, learned a lesson. It's like, yeah, don't do low price games on Kickstarter. It just
Mm.
doesn't work. You have to do big blingy projects with lots of bits in. They have to be high value because it's that ratio between the cost of the game and the postage. Because just because a game's cheap doesn't mean the postage is cheap.
Sure.
Postage is still quite high. Postage is a nightmare. It's a
Yeah.
real killer at the moment. And it ain't going to get better. So yeah, moving forwards, we'll do the big projects on Kickstarter, probably Game Found, and then there'll be other projects like um, Fighting Fantasy or the Animal Rules football. That ain't going anywhere near crowdfunding. That's just going to go straight into retail because it's just a deck of cards. I mean, it just a couple of dollars to produce each unit. It's ridiculously cheap
Mm.
to produce. So there is no point going to Kickstarter with that.
Yeah, there's an
Um,
interesting relationship in the Kickstarter space around the almost virality, the social media aspect as well, isn't there? Where you need
mm.
to generate a certain type of buzz and hype around
Oh
the
yes,
release, and that can be really super
yes.
to do. I mean, it's quite surprising because
Oh,
Fighting Fantasy you would have thought would be such a strong brand that it would almost have an inbuilt virality to it, but it must be tough to get that ball rolling.
and yeah, I mean, Ian Livingstone, bless his heart, he's been tweeting loads. We've got access to the Fighting Fantasy Facebook page, so there's different groups we can interact with. I think it's a different group. Up until now, I've generally been, you know, most of my focus has been on the board game geek community
Mm.
because that's the easy community to get to. But there isn't Board Game Geek is very much a US centered group. Even though it's global, I'm guessing the majority of people use it live in the United States. And fighting fantasy isn't a big thing in the US. It's a big UK thing.
Mm.
It's not a big American thing. So I think there where we came unstuck is like, yeah, there's not a big crossover. So which is why it can be difficult getting to the right people. But I kind of figure we'll get there. We just keep
Mm.
plugging away, just keep chipping away, get the game out there. We'll do the next one, and it's kind of some games take a while to build up. Some games are overnight successes. Other games it takes a little while for them to establish themselves. But you just
Mm.
keep going at it. Um, so yeah, I'm not letting this one die. I've spent too much time, too much money, too much
Yeah.
effort, and I do believe there is a place for it in the marketplace. I do believe it is a game that once people try it, go, yeah, this is a really good adventure game. And again, it's a problem because can't talk about it more because that would give away spoilers.
Sure.
You know, I can't say, oh yeah, in this adventure you do this or that. It's like you have to play it. You have to play it to see what it can do.
That's really interesting as well when you talk about it in terms of it's like one playthrough for each of the adventures
mm,
in the same way as the books in a way, because obviously once you've read the
yeah.
book, you've read the book. But do you
mm.
have that replayability from the various choices? So would you be able to go through it again and then take a different path through it, or does it not work in quite that way?
There are, in theory, you could do, but the reality is that, and to a certain degree, the books like this, you are guided.
Sure.
You know, you know, there's a beginning and there's an end point, and you want players to get to the end point, and on the way there will be branching points, but eventually some of those little branch lines peter out or they merge with the main storyline because you are guiding people towards the end point.
Mm.
So I would say generally no, there's not a lot of replayability unless you have a short-term memory loss or something like that. I don't know. But as I say, but it's a lot of fun running it for other people
Mm.
because you get, you get to, and I've run it with so many different people and different groups react in different ways, and you get some really funny situations happening. So I would say for an individual that owns the game, if you're happy playing it with different groups, for you, there is replayability because you are getting to see the game through other people's eyes in that it's weird the way that even though it's the same adventure each time, how things can go in weirdly different directions depending on the group dynamic.
Mm.
And kind of think that shouldn't be the case. It's like everybody's doing sort of the same thing, but no, that is not the case. It is, um, and one example, and I hesitate not to give spoilers. So there was something that happened in one of the playtests, and I didn't see it coming. In that there was a certain situation set up where specific hero was privy to certain knowledge,
Mm.
and that put them in a difficult situation. And they came up with an absolute genius solution within the confines of the game. That wasn't set up. It wasn't a case of, yeah, here's the situation, and there is an answer that is available to you. I didn't even just, and I can't give away more of that. But when we
Sure.
played it, it's like that was everybody played. It's like that was amazing. That was just like that will never happen again. Um, but that guy, that person was put in a difficult spot, and they found a brilliant solution to the problem without there being a game master involved. And I thought, yeah, this system works. I can't say more than that because
Yeah.
that would be giving
But that's
away the story.
great to hear because that's for
Mm,
me one of the best things about role playing games. And if
mm,
you've been able to capture that into the Final
mm,
Fantasy game, the idea that the same people could, sorry, different people could be faced with the same challenge and the same
mm,
scenario, but then what makes it a special experience is how they
mm.
tackle it and how they choose to solve it. That's why role playing
Yes.
games can be so much fun because you're all
Yeah.
telling stories in a different way than just reading it
Mm,
straightforward.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How
Well,
did you?
that's one of the things. Yeah, I
Sorry,
mean,
go
that's one of the things I do. Is I didn't want to do cards where it says, "Oh, you're in this situation. You can either do A, B, or C," because you've seen these multiple choice questions, and it's like there's always one that's obvious.
on. Hmm.
So instead I thought we're going to try something different where you're in this situation, think of something to do as a group, decide what you want to do, then flip the card, and then on the back it will have potential solutions, and you see which one best fits the idea you came up with. So you're not arguing over should we do A, B, or C. It's like, well, what should we do? What resources have we got? What might work in this situation? And then what I've had to do is try and work out what they might come up. What are the range of possibilities they could come up with, and
Hmm.
make sure they're on the back of the card. And it's just things like with one of the adventures, one of the adventures allows you to be really clever. I mean, super clever. I've never yet come across a party who's chosen the super clever set of choices. They've not done it yet. And I'm waiting for somebody to do, because when they do it, they go, ah, that was great. We had this idea and it worked. And yeah, that's still got to happen.
Well, you got, because there's 5 different adventures in the set,
Hmm.
aren't there? So how did you choose
Yeah.
which? Because there's 59 different Fighting Fantasy books from the original run, and then more besides that. How did you select the ones that you wanted to adapt for the game?
It was completely random, going back to
Right.
an earlier answer. I don't know. I thought, well, you have to do Warlock.
Mhm.
I don't know. It's just the books I picked. There's no particular conscious decision making behind them. Death Trap Dungeon was well known. It's just, yeah, I not really a lot of conscious decision making behind the books I chose. What I did, I suppose, one of the things I wanted to do was test to see if the system was adaptable because, um, in a book format, you've got complete control over what the player does, whether it's open air or within a dungeon. But you don't have that with a group. So if it's in a dungeon, it's easy. You can have a dungeon floor plan. These are the way you can go. But with things like Island of the Lizard King, you don't have a dungeon. You're out in the open, and that's like, okay, that's a challenge. How do I deal with that? Because
Hmm.
I can't have a floor plan now. So I had to come up with a different way of doing things, so where you get to see what you see. So you have these cards say you can see this or you can see that. You don't actually have a designated floor plan. Um, Similarly with Forest of Doom, again, sort of open ended, and you got this challenge is like players can sort of go everywhere, but you want to make sure they still generally follow storyline, that they're kind of guided and don't go straight to the end.
Mhm.
So you have to construct it in a way that the story sort of makes sense. But in this case, with the Forest of Doom, you've got a top-down view of the forest, and you've got kind of encounter points that you move between. And then, although there are 5 adventures in the book, um, the Forest of Doom, I didn't split it into 2, but what I did is in Forest of Doom, the story is based on you going to find this axe that the local dwarven king has lost, and he needs it to fight this battle.
Mhm.
I thought, wouldn't it be fun to fight the battle? So that's the second part. So the second part is actually not in any of the books. The second part is not a dungeon crawl. It's like, okay, we're now playing Helm's Deep. Okay, so you get a couple of days to prepare. Okay, then you lay out your line of fortification cards, and these are the units you get to play with, and then you fight a battle. So, because that's one of the things I thought, don't want every adventure to be a dungeon crawl because it's just going to get samey. So yeah, the last one is, yeah, the first part is you explore the Forest of Doom, and a minor spoiler is there are certain people, if you're nice to them,
Hmm.
they will actually turn up at the battle. So you're also, without knowing it, you're recruiting allies. There's not a disconnected thing. The second bit, yeah, you're fighting a battle, and you have to decide where you want to put your forces. Are you going to keep reserves? And so so it's very, very different. And but the system copes with it, and that's something I wanted to test. So it wasn't just going to be a dungeon crawl. That the base system can be adapted to deal with adventures in different ways. Or can deal with a wide range of different circumstances.
Yeah, I mean that is very exciting to hear. 'Cause, I mean,
Mm.
I've backed it, so I'm looking forward to getting my
Okay, cool,
copy
good.
and, and giving it a go
Mm,
because that sounds really really cool. I did have one last question just around that art piece. So obviously, you say
mm,
you're commissioning lots of new art. I've seen some of the art already that looks really really cool.
mm.
Was there ever any consideration about using the original art from the original books, or is there too much complication? Because I think the artists own a lot of that nowadays, don't they? The original art
No, I think
pieces.
Ian offered in and said, "Oh, if you want to use the
Okay.
original art, well, you can do." But my thinking is, you had a couple of issues. First of all, if you're going on Kickstarter and you're using already existing artwork, it's like, well, why are you on Kickstarter?
Right.
Because you've already got artwork. And then you also have issues with the consistency of style, because obviously the existing artwork will only cover so much. And I wanted the artwork to be, have a degree of consistency throughout. Um, but I think, yeah, you can have issue. It sort of makes sense to say, oh yeah, let's reuse artwork, but people see that as the cheap option. Because I remember the game. It's like back when Magic first came out. I think D&D they did a collectible. I can't even remember the name of it. They did a collectible card game, and they reused a whole load of the existing artwork because they had a ton of artwork.
Was it
And
Spellfire or something like that?
Hmm? So, yes, I think it might Spellfire. And I think part of it was the perception is, yeah, you're just reusing old artwork, but obviously, by definition, all of the artwork in Magic was new. It was because it was created for Magic. Whereas with Spellfire, yeah, it's just all retread. It's just, yeah, recycled artwork. So, yeah, that's why I didn't use the original artwork.
Right. No, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I think
Mm.
I do like the idea of that consistent vision as well, because obviously they do take place in the same universe, don't they? A lot of those adventures. So creating that world for this new version of the game and that this new version of Alancia is a really interesting take. So, is there anything else that you'd want to share about the game or about the Kickstarter?
Uh, Not at the moment. No, I think we covered most of it. Yeah, yeah.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I could talk about this forever,
Mm.
but I know, I know you're busy, and I don't want to take any more of
Yeah.
your time. But thanks very much, Martin, for joining me and
Mm.
talking me through your career and
Mm.
the design principles and various bits of that stuff, and for talking about the Fighting Fantasy Adventures game and for designing all of these great games. So yeah, thank you very
It's
much.
okay. Yeah, it beats teaching.
I hope that you enjoyed my talk with Martin Wallace. I had an incredible time getting to hear all of those fascinating behind the scenes stories. Thank you once again, Martin, for taking the time out to talk with me. If you want to find out more about Fighting Fantasy Adventures, I've included links to Martin's website and to the Kickstarter campaign in the description below. And you can also find a link to my Patreon where you can support the channel and help me do more of this kind of work. And if you do want to see more interviews with the great and the good of games design, please leave a comment below. I would love to hear who you think I should talk to and what kind of questions you think I should ask in future interviews of this nature. Thank you very much for watching. I am Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery. Honestly, this is one of the best games ever made. This is why street toughs used to walk around New York City with a copy of Brass on their shoulders like a boombox, just to prove how cool they were, because it's amazing. Honestly, amazing. I know that sounds sarcastic, and this doesn't make any sense as a bit whatsoever, but it's amazing. Honestly, it's amazing.